Alrighty.
All right. So, hi everyone. Happy March 27th. Welcome to the second workshop that I'm doing. This week we'll be working on gardening principles. Share sound. So yeah, introductions. I'm Casey Hummeldorf. I'm Cassandra Hummeldorf. I'm the one that's been doing these workshops, setting up this program for everyone. I've been doing this in partnership with VCE Prince William Master Gardeners, who's been so helpful, and I've been so lucky to get their permission to use their videos for this workshop. And I've also been in partnership with the Manassas Park City Library to get a seed exchange box implemented. Valerie, if you would like to take over for that.
Sure. So we are thrilled to be partnered with Casey here. We have our seed exchange box located kind of behind the library on the trail path for the Blooms Park Trail. So anybody is welcome to stop by and leave or take seeds from the seed exchange. Personally, I have worked at the Norfolk Botanical Garden in Norfolk, Virginia. I managed their native butterfly house there, so pollinator plants are my specialty. And I'm also a member of the Council of Botanical and Horticultural Libraries on the East Coast. So if there are any resources that anybody is looking for, I am more than happy to help connect you with those. So if there are any questions, you guys can always reach out to us here at the library or to Casey. But I'm going to hand it back on over to you, Casey.
Okay. And overview of today's workshops rules again. We've already done the introduction. We're going to be watching gardening principles video provided by the VCE Master Gardeners today. This video is shorter than last session's video, so if you were here for last session, don't worry, it won't pass 2 o'clock. And then we are going to have our Q&A and closing 10 minutes. Please keep muted during the videos. Put questions in the chat, put comments in the chat. I personally love seeing you guys' comments and stuff to these videos. It just makes me really happy to see you guys are all learning something. No spamming in the chat. I know that's a really out there rule, but I have worked with children on Zoom and they tend to spam a lot, so I just want to keep that ground rule set. Sessions will be recorded and uploaded onto YouTube, so if you don't feel comfortable being recorded, you are free to leave. I will not take offense to that. Valerie will not take offense to that. The Zoom will be uploaded onto the library's YouTube page in a couple of days after the session, so if you are leaving, keep an eye out for that. Gardening principles. Again, before the video starts, I want to say thank you to the VCE Prince William Master Gardeners for letting me use their video. Also, if you were here last session, they are going to touch base on some stuff that was said last session too, just because it's that important. And I will be pausing from time to time just to like add a comment or two, but yeah.
My name is Thomas Bowles. I'm the Agricultural Extension Agent here in Prince William County. Today we're going to talk about garden principles. So the first thing we want to talk about is right plant, right place. Here we have 2 pictures taken the same time of year, roughly the distance between DC and Myrtle Beach apart. If you thought about it, which would be the right plant for this place, naturally you'd want to think it's the one on the left with all the nice green grass, not the scraggly almost dead looking grass on the right. The actual answer though is the scraggly looking one. These were taken in February. Go back for a second. Both of these are in a desert climate. The nice green grass is in Kabul. The scraggly stuff is in Helmand, which is in southern Afghanistan. So it's February in a desert environment. Now, cool season grass, you would expect in February to be kind of green, but the only way that this grass stays green is by lots and lots of water. Way more water than they should be using on grass. So the scraggly looking one, it only looks like that for a month, maybe a month and a half out of the year. The rest of the time, it looks like it does on the left. Very green, very lush. It's very good at self-repairing itself. Right plant, right place. And so when we're thinking about a garden, we need to think about our space and the plants that we want. Are they a good fit for that space? It's important that you research the plants that you want to grow. Because if you don't know what the plant needs, if you don't know how it grows, what it's supposed to look like, what its life cycle is like, your chance of being successful is very limited. If you're going to do an internet search, you want to search the plant name, and then after that you want to put site.edu, and that will bring up university sites that are based on research. Seed catalogs also can have a wealth of information, even if you are buying plant starts instead of seeds. Those seed catalogs have a lot of good information on culturally on plants, especially vegetables, but ornamentals as well. And so in the bottom you have an example of how you would put in a search. We want to group plants with similar needs together, and this reduces our maintenance. This helps conserve water. This allows us to reduce our management, and we have more time to enjoy the plants instead of working on them. So one thing you want to think about is how much sun do you have to work with? Full sun, we consider 8 or more hours of daily sun. And then you need to think about there are some plants that do really well with full sun that need more than 8 hours. Some plants need partial sun, which is 6 to 8 hours. And some plants need shade. Some plants also need direct sun versus filtered sun. All things to think about when you're planning, what do I want to grow and do I have the space to grow it in? Space is really important in terms of how big is this going to get. I see a lot of times, particularly with arborvitae being planted very close together and people not realizing that arborvitae get 20 feet wide. And so the plants grow together and they start having disease and insect problems, and they've wasted the investment that they've made. So do you have the space for what you want to grow? And if you don't, you need to think about, well, what's most important? Now you can modify or mitigate space problems using trellising, but that only works really for vining plants. Then you need to think water. How accessible is your water? You really don't want to drag a lot of water a great distance, particularly in the summer. You need to think about how much more water you're going to have to put out for plants that haven't fully established yet. Plants that haven't established need more water and more tender care. That's true whether they are vegetable starts or whether they are, saplings. You have to make sure that those young plants get enough water so the roots can establish and they can be successful. Now, a lot of our perennials can survive on the water that they're given through nature. However, you may still need to water in times of drought, depending on the plant. We are seeing a lot of issues with trees that are the result of many years of too much water, actually. So that's another thing you have to think about. Think about drainage as well. You don't want to plant a lot of things that need well-drained soil in a place that's going to be wet most of the time. Speaking of the soil, you need to think about that as well. The soil is our most important element because the soil ecosystem helps support our plants. And so one of the things that you want to think about right away is, do I have the right pH? If the pH is off, then nutrients will be locked up in the soil and plant unavailable. You need to think about how much available nutrients there are in the soil. Does the soil drain well? And how much effort is it going to take to improve the soil? So one of the things we always recommend is a soil test. The soil test helps you keep track of what's going on chemically. We recommend using a reputable lab. Virginia Tech has one. Shameless plug there, but there are other labs you could go through. The reason why you should go through a lab is that, say for example, your pH is out of whack. Well, a lab can tell you how much lime to add to fix the pH problem. If you have a meter, it'll tell you what the pH is, but it won't tell you how to fix it. With heavier soils, we recommend every 3 to 4 years doing a soil test. If you're in really sandy soils, then you want to do it much more often because sandy soils don't hold nutrients as well as heavier soils. If you don't understand your soil test, talk to your local extension staff. They'll be happy to go over it with you and explain what's in the soil test and what it's really saying. My name is Thomas Bowles. I'm the Agricultural Extension Agent here.
Sorry everyone, I just went to pause it. I didn't mean for it to, you know what they say, technology problems always happen. So I just want to quickly say again, for the Virginia Cooperative fees for doing soil samples, if you are in Virginia, it only costs $10 to get your soil tested, get the information needed to treat your soils. If you are out of state though, Virginia Cooperative will still accept your soil samples, but you'll need to pay $16 if you're out of state versus if you're in state. Yeah.
To go over it with you and explain what's in the soil test and what it's really saying. We want to use the soil test to base our fertilizer and lime applications. Applying fertilizer sort of willy-nilly, applying lime without really any understanding of how much you actually need, both of those things can cause problems. Too much fertilizer is bad for the environment, but it's also bad for the plant. Excess growth can attract pests. Too much lime can drive the pH up into a very alkaline situation that's really difficult to fix. You want to measure your garden area because when you get soil test recommendations, they're going to tell you, in the case of gardens, typically it's in how many pounds of product per 100 square feet. So if you don't know how many square feet you have, you can't really figure out exactly, well, this is telling me to put down 2 pounds of nitrogen per 100 square feet. If I don't know how many 100 square feet, I don't know how much to buy. And remember, with lime, lime is not an annual application. If you get a soil test and it tells you to add lime, you add that lime, and then you wait 3 to 4 years, get another soil test, and if it says to add more lime, then do it then. Most of us here in Northern Virginia have to deal with really bad soil. Subsoil is most of what we have here. A lot of the topsoil has been stripped away. A lot of the soil that we're left with is compacted, doesn't have a lot of organic matter in it. It's not a very hospitable place for plants to grow. It doesn't have a lot of biodiversity within the soil. The soil ecosystem has been disrupted. So let's look at the picture here If you look at the soil where the glove is pointing, that soil that's been amended after 1 year, the other soil, the big hunk that's in the middle of the picture, that's the parent soil. That's taken, probably 10 feet away from where that garden bed is. And the way we got from that red clay to that nice brown soil is by increasing organic matter. And we did that with adding compost, and we did that with using cover crops. The other thing that will help your soil is to minimize tillage. You don't need to till every year. Tillage can disrupt microorganisms in the soil, and when you disrupt that ecosystem, it makes it harder for plants to succeed. So you really want to back off of plowing as much as you can. I understand with certain crops, it's really hard to not till. I mean, how do you get potatoes out of the ground if you don't dig them up, right? So you want to minimize that tillage, but till when you need to, add organic matter. You want to keep the soil covered throughout the year. The best thing you can do for your gardens, particularly your vegetable gardens, is keep something growing in them throughout the year. That's going to help the soil ecosystem. That soil ecosystem, those microbes there, are making things plant available. It's working in symbiosis with the plants. It's using the solar energy that's coming down into that area anyway and keeping those populations up. And it's also helping with preventing erosion if you've got the soil covered. Try and have some plant diversity. Nature hates a monoculture. The more different plants you have put together, the more diversity there is above ground and below ground. That helps keep the environment in the soil in balance. And when it's in balance, you don't have massive pest problems. You might have some pest pressure, but you won't have pests out of control. The other thing that you want to do, or don't want to do rather, is don't work soil when it's wet. If your soil is too wet, you're going to compact it, which is going to take away from all the other things that you're doing to try and fix your soil. And we all do this in the spring. We get eager to get out, want to do something in the dirt, and end up, if we're not careful, end up working the soil when it's too wet. And so we damage our soil instead of helping our soil. Think about hardiness. Is the plant that you want to grow adaptable to the zone in which you live in? USDA has hardiness maps for the whole country. This is just the one for Virginia. You know, some plants do better in certain hardiness zones than others. Some varieties of the same plant will do better in certain hardiness zones, but you need to research your plant and make sure that you understand where it can grow, especially if you're talking perennials. If you're talking annuals, it doesn't matter so much, but you still have to be aware of how long it takes to grow. Peanuts, for example, peanuts are perennial if you let them. We grow them as annuals because we collect the peanuts. Even though we're treating them like annuals, Northern Virginia is a little bit high in the hardiness scale to really have enough of a summer for peanuts to grow to be harvestable. So again, it's researching the plant and understanding where that plant fits in ecologically. Then there's wildlife. If you plant it, something will come. Whether that something is a good thing or a bad thing, sometimes subjective, sometimes it's really apparent if it's a bad thing. For example, the picture there is sweet potatoes, and you can see there's a lot of sweet potatoes that have been topped, and that's groundhog damage. That's at our teaching garden in Bristow, and unfortunately we've had some issues with groundhogs. And so you need to think, okay, if I'm attracting the wrong kind of wildlife, what can I do to help shield my plants? And sometimes it's a matter of caging. After we had this damage, we installed cages around the edges of the bed. That helped a little bit. Wildlife are clever, and some of them are very determined. Also, sometimes we want to attract wildlife. We want to bring in songbirds. We want to bring in pollinators. And so that's part of your research, what wildlife is attracted to the plants that I'm growing. We also need to plant our plants right. The biggest problem I see in Northern Virginia is things getting planted too deeply. And it's really important that you think about how a plant's supposed to grow. So trees, for example, have a swell at the base of them, kind of where the stem and the root come together, and that needs to be elevated above the soil. Unfortunately, a lot of times that's buried in the pot that you get from the nursery, and you take that and you bury it deeper, and you run into all sorts of problems. It's not problems right away, but problems that will dramatically shorten the life of that tree. You also want to carefully inspect the plants that you get before you purchase them to make sure that they're not carrying pests, they're not damaged, they're not carrying disease. And also, as I mentioned before, with newly planted things, you want to make sure they get adequate water. You want to make sure that they have plenty of water to establish themselves. So one of your plant options are native plants, and native plants might not be as showy, although our native eastern redbud is a very showy plant in certain times of the year. They have evolved to local conditions. The local pollinators, for example, are very evolved to deal with those plants. They need those native plants as a good nectar source. Native plants are generally more drought tolerant. They're better for feeding wildlife. They're much better for total ecology. There are certain cultivars that have been grown or that have been imported that look really showy, but they don't provide any food for our wildlife. Oops. So one other bit we'll throw in about non-natives and natives. A lot of times I get calls about how do I know if something isn't GMO? So let's talk a little bit about heirloom, hybrid, and GMO. So first of all, there are only a handful of GMO crops allowed in the United States. The seed for that is expensive, and it's generally not available to the non-agricultural retail market. You are not going to go out, generally speaking, and be able to buy genetically modified seed. Corn would be the problem. Corn would be the most likely thing that you could buy, but it would be expensive, and usually it's agricultural seed dealers that are selling it. It's not the general retail market. I see a lot of non-GMO stickers on food where there's no GMO plants, but there are only a handful, I think it's 9, I think it's up to 9 now, crops that are allowed to be GMO in the United States. So GMO is not something, if you're concerned about GMO, it's not something you really need to worry about getting GMO seeds. Heirlooms are cultivars or varieties that you can collect seeds from and plant those seeds and reliably expect them to be similar to their parent plants. They've been bred for a long time. They will breed true. Hybrids are crossbreeds of different heirlooms. The problem with hybrids are good and bad. Hybrids can be bred for, say, disease resistance. But in terms of seed saving, if you take those hybrid seeds that you've collected from your garden and you plant them, it's genetic roulette as to what you'll get. You may get some that breed back true. You may get some that are really weird. I see this a lot of times in hybrid tomatoes. I've seen hybrid cherry tomatoes where, as an experiment, as an ag teacher, we would plant the seeds that we collected from the previous year, and sometimes we get cherry tomatoes, sometimes we get big tomatoes, sometimes we get bushy tomatoes, sometimes they're viney tomatoes. We get all sorts of different things, and sometimes they just will grow to a certain height and then just kind of peter out because they don't have the resistance that the hybrid does. Another thing to think about is pest management, and we recommend integrated pest management, or IPM. And what that really is identifying what the pest is, scouting to see how many pests you're dealing with. If we're talking insects, if it's disease, how extensive is the disease. And then determining, do I really need to control this? And if I do, I choose the control that will do the least harm to humans, wildlife, and the environment. So if we look at the picture here, that looks bad. If we were to think that that is a disease and start spraying fungicide, that would do nothing. This is sun scald. This is just a function of that being, this is basically sunburn for those peppers. The week before, they were clipped back. This particular pepper was exposed to sun where it wasn't before, and it's got itself a sunburn. With that pepper, you could cut away that white area and the rest of the pepper would be fine, but this isn't something you need to treat. It's really important to understand, if you have a problem, what is the cause of that problem? Because it's easy for you to just pick a product, apply it, and it not necessarily do anything because it's treating the wrong thing. If you need help identifying pests, we have a horticultural help desk that can help you figure out what's going on and make control recommendations. When it comes to using pesticides, if that's what it takes to control the issue you're having, you really need to read the label. The label is the law, and so legally you cannot use a pesticide other than the directions on the label. One of the pesticides we see that gets used quite a bit illegally are mothballs. Mothballs are not allowed to be used outside. And yet I have people telling me that, oh yeah, I put mothballs out. So it's important that you read the label. It is a contract between you, the person who manufactured it, and the US government that you will follow the label when you buy it. Understand that organic pesticides are still pesticides. They are not harmless. They may be less toxic in some cases. In some cases, they might be just as toxic as synthetic. It's important to wear the proper PPE or personal protective equipment as directed by the label. And for most chemicals, that's going to be long pants, long shirt, gloves of some kind, shoes that are not going to absorb the pesticide. Going out in your tennis shoes and spraying your grass is not a good idea because that pesticide is going to get in your shoes. Later in 2021, there will be a pesticide disposal event. I don't have the details on that yet. Later on this week, we're actually going to have a meeting about where and when that's going to be. So if you've got extra pesticide lying around, it's something you might want to think about, disposing of those. And again, read the label. I cannot tell you how many times I've run into issues where people have made a problem worse by not reading the label. Actually, last year I had a client who applied an herbicide that was only supposed to be used on warm season grass. They applied it to their fescue lawn and killed it. If you had read the label, it said right on the label, only used for warm season grass. So you just have to be careful and you have to follow the instructions. Let's talk about pruning. Why do we prune? We prune to improve or maintain the structure of plants, to get diseased or damaged material off the plant, to increase airflow. And sometimes pruning can help with flowering and fruiting depending on what particular plant we're talking about. So we want to prune the right way at the right time. We have an excellent pruning video that, let's see, that class was 2 weeks ago, I think, maybe 3 weeks ago, that's up on our YouTube channel. that has really detailed instructions on how to prune correctly. But you want to use sharp tools. You want to clean those tools between plants so you're not spreading disease. You want to cut at the branch collar using a 3-cut method. So if you look at the diagram that's there, you make a first undercut, then you come back and you do a second cut, and that takes heavy weight of the branch off, and then you make a third cut right at the branch collar, and that allows the tree to repair itself over time. It makes it much, much more healthy than if you do something like make one cut, and it will potentially, depending on how big the I suggest take a look at the YouTube plant, or the YouTube video on our website, and see how to do pruning right. You also want to do research. You also want to do research pruned at different times of the year. Virginia Cooperative Extension has pruning calendars for trees and shrubs that are available, and they'll give you a time of when the best time is, when not to prune. So in summary, we want to make sure that we're using the right plant at the right place, we're fertilizing appropriately, we're planting things correctly, we're choosing natives when possible, we're using integrated pest management to control our pests and to do the least harm, and then pruning correctly to keep particularly our woodies healthy. With that, I've got some resources for you that are listed here. One is Natives from the Department of Conservation and Recreation. How to Plant a Tree is an excellent publication that is good for trees and shrubs. Other plant lists for natives are from Plant Nova Natives and the Virginia Native Plant Society. And then there are a whole lot of publications from Tech that you can download for free. This list will go out with the survey in a couple of days after we're done, and that way you don't have to worry about scribbling these down. So with that, I'll open it up to questions.
And with that, I too open it up with questions. I don't want to end, I want to open the chat. Again, everyone, thank you so much for coming to my second workshop. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you so much for watching this. I'm opening it up for questions. Any questions that we can't answer, you can always email the Master Gardener Horticultural help desk. The email is up on your screen right now. And yeah, Valerie, do you have any final remarks?
I do. So I do apologize if at any point I interrupted the video. Our internet connection kind of got a little bit wonky. But I will include some of the resources that were in today's video in the description box in the final video that we post to YouTube for you guys to check out if you're interested. I will say I found it very interesting that there were only a select number of GMO crops that were actually available in the United States. I didn't know that. So I actually looked them up real quick, and it was the ones you would commonly expect, but there were a couple that did surprise me. It was corn, soybean, cotton, potatoes, papaya, which I found actually kind of surprising, summer squash, canola, alfalfa, apples, and sugar beets. I got that from the USDA website. So that was a really interesting fact we learned today.
Well, thank you for looking those up for me.
Yeah, so Nicole, I see you put something in the chat. Thank you so much for coming. And I also agree, my pruning techniques have not always been the best. I've always been kind of bad, and I would just like pinch it off with my finger if I could instead of doing the appropriate technique. But as you said, here's to improvement. So thank you so much for joining us. Were there any other questions? If not, I guess if it's good with you, Casey, everybody is free to head out. And like I said, we will post the final video on YouTube, and hopefully we'll see everybody in 2 weeks for our next gardening session.
Yeah, so everyone, before you go, our next gardening session is going to be about containers for gardening and seed starting. That one will not be a VCE video. I will be doing a full presentation on that. So yeah, again, thank you all so much for coming. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for going through with our technical difficulties. And just thank you all so much for your support. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Bye, guys.